Well, talks continue with the Taliban and a possible U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is the conflict where Canada deployed a combat mission for more than a decade and suffered 160 fatalities and hundreds more injured. Let's talk about this with former Afghanistan correspondent Graeme Smith. He's with the International Crisis Group, author of the critically acclaimed The Dogs Are Eating Them Now about Canada's war in Afghanistan. He joins us while visiting Kitchener-Waterloo. Graeme, you've been in Afghanistan a heck of a lot more than me, and it always seemed kind of surreal to talk peace with the Taliban. Is peace possible without us turning back the clock to, stoning women in soccer fields and banishing girls from schools?
Well, yeah, it is a little surreal for guys like you and me because we've both been on the other side of the battlefield. And so it's a little weird now that the Taliban are sending, diplomatic delegations to international conferences and putting together policy papers and so forth. But it's weird, but it's good, to be honest. This is the largest war in the world right now. 44,000 people killed last year, more people being killed in Afghanistan right now than Yemen and Syria combined. So those dusty battlefields that you and I remember have heated up a lot, actually, since the Canadians departed. And this diplomacy is the best chance we've seen in more than a decade to finally bring the war to an end.
So I'm just curious about the Taliban's mindset. If they find a peace deal and the United States pulls out, are we back to the same way it was before, or are the Taliban moderated a little bit and they're no longer, sort of against girls in schools and against women not being completely covered in burqas?
Yeah, the Taliban have changed a lot, just like everybody in Afghanistan. Times have changed. They're all on Facebook now and WhatsApp. They're much more familiar with the outside world than they were during the regime in the 1990s. The other political factions in Afghanistan have grown up a lot too. They're very different from the anti-Soviet militias that tore the country apart in civil war in the 1990s. So everybody's really moved on to some degree, but there's really tough negotiation ahead about the political future of the country. So we don't know. There are a lot of question marks about what's next.
And as you point out, there's still a war going on, and they're still attacking. I mean, they attacked a fortified Afghan army base just in the last couple of weeks, 40 dead. Even U.S. Marines were on site. That certainly doesn't sound like they've turned over a new leaf at all, have they?
Well, they're certainly sending a message, and I think the risk is that as the weather gets warmer, and as you remember, when the weather gets warm, the fighting season heats up, and people start to die in large numbers. So there's a real risk that the rising violence could sidetrack the negotiations. So it's going to take steely nerves on all sides to sort of keep the focus at the bargaining table.
I guess a bit of a philosophical question, because you've thought about these questions in your excellent book, of course, try to deal with it. But, does this Taliban peace deal, if it comes together, does that mean Canada's efforts there were in vain, that we sacrificed 160 soldiers for nothing?
I think it's worth looking back at some of our mistakes in Afghanistan, not just in how we fought the war, but why we went to war in the first place. It certainly changed the way people say the phrase Taliban Jack, let me tell you that. The people who were saying that we should talk our way out of this instead of fighting our way out of this start to look a little more prescient in retrospect.
Yeah, I think you're talking specifically Jack Layton, too, the NDP leader at the time. He took a real ribbing about that. So I guess the bottom line here is the Americans are trying to get out of there. They leave. How big a vacuum is left behind? Can the can the Afghan forces withstand a Taliban that doesn't have an American counterbalance there?
Well, nobody believes that without international support that the government would last very long. The president himself has said that he needs the international support to balance out against the Taliban. I think what's interesting is that if there is a peace deal with the Taliban, this will still be a country at war. Because the Taliban are at war with the real extremists, the local Islamic State affiliates out there. And then, the government's fighting those guys too. So you would see probably the Taliban and the government teaming up against ISIS in eastern Afghanistan.
All right, Graeme Smith, sobering assessment, but it's always nice checking in with you because we know you sure know your stuff over there. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.